Good morning. This is the fourth Sunday of Lent, 22nd of March. We're in the third of 4 weeks in our lectionary cycle through Lent, where we are existing with long readings from the Gospel of John. Now, I'd hoped when I started this 4-part series that we could give you a little hint each week about something in the Gospel of John that would help you read it and understand what's going on and how John is trying to use his great imagination to help us understand who Jesus is. Week 1, we were in John 3, the long passage of Jesus' dialogue with Nicodemus, and I told you that when John and Jesus has a conversation with somebody, they often talk on two different levels, apparently about the same thing, but clearly not understanding it the same way. And it's the tension between the statement of Jesus and the misunderstanding of the one with whom he's speaking that we are invited to really dig in so we can understand what John is trying to say. Last week, I didn't give you any hints because rather than preach on John 4 with the outbreak of the coronavirus, its presence here in Ohio, and our beginning to social distance so much, we looked at Exodus 17, and I used that story of water coming from the rock as a way to try to find some spiritual solace. That sermon is online on our YouTube page, and it's where you find this sermon if you want to go to Trinity Lutheran Church, Vermilion, Ohio, and on the YouTube side you can listen to that and hear what I said if you weren't with us last week. Today, in chapter 9, I want to tell you about two things that John does. And again, John is an imaginative writer, and one thing he does is make great use of symbolism. In this case, John has, in his great symbolism, so much going on. He loves the number 7. 7 is the number of completeness within the Hebrew tradition. Creation being done in 6 work days. Add a 7th day as a day of rest, and you have a complete week. John has 2 uses of the number 7 that we encounter in today's text. One is that Jesus will perform 7 signs in John. Other Gospels will call them miracles, but John calls them signs because they point to Jesus and invite us through the miracle to understand who Jesus is. The sign today is the healing of this man who was blind from birth. The other list is 7 statements of I am. Today's Jesus says, I am the light of the world. The healing of the blind man shows what that light means in a real situation. This goes back to a story in Exodus 3, and I invite you to read that. Moses at the burning bush, and when finally Moses says, I have to know your name to tell Pharaoh your name, God says, I am who I am. And it is that understanding, I am, becomes the sacred name of God. Jesus will use that 7 times in the gospel. Look for those as you're reading through John. Now, there are a lot of questions in this text. Questions that are asked of the man who was born blind. The first of them, the one that is asked multiple times, is, how were you healed? And he keeps telling them, this man made some mud, he put it on my eyes, told me to go to Siloam and wash it off. I washed it off, and when I washed it off, I could see. His friends and neighbors ask him that the first time. Then they take him to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees ask it repeatedly. And when they push him on it, it is clear that there is another question that they're implying when they asked, how did this happen? And that question is, why were you healed? Because you see, this healing took place on a Sabbath day. And in their understanding of proper Sabbath protocol, what Jesus did was a violation of their understanding of keeping the Sabbath. So they want to know, why were you healed? Because a holy man would certainly not break the Sabbath in order to do this. Well, they don't get answers, and in part because they're asking the wrong questions. The question isn't how were you healed? The important question isn't even why were you healed? The question is, who healed you? Well, the Pharisees did get it wrong, but we shouldn't be too hard on them. Social media debates have been happening this week. I've been spending some time on social media sites for Lutheran clergy. Many of us have been looking for ways to try to figure out how to be the church and how to be a pastor to a congregation where we can't go and visit anybody. We can't talk to them face to face. We can't meet them in our office or any place else around town. How do we do this? And there's been some good suggestions, and I hope you'll see the fruit of that as this experience goes on. But there have also been some debates on these sites about issues. Well, the people who post these questions are passionate about a particular issue. I don't think they're issues central to the need to be a pastor to the people. But folks argue about them vehemently on both sides. And their energy and their passion and their rigidity leaves nothing to be desired by Pharisees in any story of the Gospels. The truth is, human beings often love to run down rabbit holes. We love, in very complex and questions where there is no ready answer, we love to find some way to speak and to come up with an answer for ourselves that makes us feel secure, whether or not it's the right question. It's just what we do. In the U.S. today, we're shutting down. Shutting down our social interactions. We're shutting down our economy. And that's causing a lot of questions to be asked among us. What questions are you asking? Certainly one at the forefront has to be, how long? How long is this going to last? You know, we have said we're going to suspend in-person worship for 4 weeks. That takes us through Easter Sunday. We'll meet and evaluate on week 3, and of course, if things improve, then we'll have a great celebration of Easter. But we know it might extend beyond that. The truth to the how long is no one knows yet. All we can do is to try to do the best we can to care for ourselves and our neighbors and prevent this virus from spreading faster or more widely than it should. Another question being asked is, who's to blame? Well, when it comes to the question of who's to blame for this virus, we know the answer, and it's no one. We have a living planet. Things change and evolve on this planet all the time, and that includes viruses. It's simply what happens on Earth. And no one's to blame. This novel coronavirus is a danger and a threat to us because nobody has any immunity to it. And until we can build some up, it will remain a threat to human societies all across the globe. Some people are saying, who's to blame for the apparently slow response we've had to dealing with this virus? Well, I believe the answer is there. It doesn't matter. At this point, the virus is amongst us, and it doesn't matter. There'll be plenty of time to have that debate, plenty of time to learn from this experience. But for right now, we need to find a way to care for one another rather than blame one another. A lot of questions people are asking is, will I survive? Will my family survive? Will we be okay? All we can do there is to follow the advice of those experts that say this social distancing, which seems so unnatural, is such a critical component of us winning this fight. It's only been a week now. We know that the longer this takes, the harder it will be to keep this discipline up, but we must support one another in practicing this social distancing, sometimes even from other family members, so that we don't give the virus a chance to bring grief into our homes. Will we survive emotionally? Some of us will be able to deal with that better than others, and for those who live with great anxiety and with fear, they need friends and neighbors and family to be there in a supportive way for them, with phone calls, video chats, cards, and letters. We need to take care of one another, especially those who are having a difficult time navigating these stormy seas. Will we survive financially? Late in this week, that has really been a question that a lot of people are struggling with, as tens of thousands of Ohioans have lost their jobs and have filed for unemployment as the stock market continues to plunge, as the financial experts don't see any kind of happy ending. We don't know what the answers will be, but we do know that everyone has to play a part. Certainly government has to play a part at all levels. And as citizens, we should be contacting our representative at all levels, insisting that they do what's necessary to keep Americans whole and not leave this crisis with ruined lives financially. But on the local level, we all have a role to play. We need to take care of our neighbors. We need to do what we can to be present to our neighbors. And one way I want to ask you to think about is volunteering. Grace's Kitchen will continue to serve meals out of our building twice a week. They're not dine-in any longer, they're carry-outs. But they're going to need volunteers. The Second Harvest Food Bank has put out a plea for volunteers, because here's the challenge. A lot of people who do this work week in and week out are in at-risk categories to suffer mostly from this virus. They are being told to stay away, or they are rightly choosing to stay away from these activities. So those who are not in the at-risk categories need to step up and fill in those trenches so that these important ministries to support our neighbors can continue. Now, a final question. Why did God allow this to happen? Why? That's the question that is asked in John 9, and it's the question that is answered, and in the same way it should be answered for us. In verse 2, the disciples of Jesus say to him when they see this blind man begging at the street corner, they say, "Jesus, who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it him or his parents?" They wanted to blame somebody. And Jesus emphatically responds, "Neither this man sinned nor his parents, period." There is no blame. But he said, this gives us an opportunity to see the works of God. And the healing that results is the work of God. But the inclusion of this man into a community with Jesus is the greater work of God. We can't blame. We have to realize that we are all in this together. There is no guilty party. Every American, every Chinese, every European, every Brazilian, every African. It doesn't matter where you live. If you're a human being, you have 7.5 billion others who have exactly the same resistance to this virus as you do. And that's 0. We're in this together. We must respond together. But I believe this is an opportunity for the body of Christ, the living body of Christ, including you and me, to be the tip of the spear that leads that response. Working with others, absolutely. But we respond to this to demonstrate a powerful work of God. We respond with compassion, with generosity, and even with sacrifice. We will walk with others as we do this work. It will be a marathon and not a sprint. Some will need our support because they will walk this path with fear and anxiety. They need our support. But we know as we walk, as the psalmist said, when we journey through this valley of death's dark shadows, we do not walk alone. We do not walk alone. We know that a loving God walks with us. We belong to God. And God, our good shepherd, does not run away from us when the wolf or a virus attacks. So church, let us go out with good courage, with compassion and with faith, not knowing where we go, or not knowing how long the journey will take, but knowing that God is with us. And as we walk in faith and with compassion, let us show the great and the powerful works of God in our time. Amen.